So,
We're live.
good evening, everyone. I'm calling to order the June 28th, 2021 meeting of the Highland Park Board of Adjustment. The borough is using the telephone format in an effort to mitigate the chance of exposure to COVID-19 as part of the borough's ongoing effort to slow the rate of transmission and avoid overwhelming our treatment centers. The public is invited to attend and participate by way of a call-in number and password, which I assume has been made public. Jennifer, would you take the roll, please?
Ms. Richmond,
Here.
Mr. Chin,
Here.
Mr. Fector,
Present.
Mr. Pheasant, Mr. Hofer,
Here.
Mr. Holtzoffel, Ms. Corbin,
Here.
Mr. Rosner,
Here.
Mr. Rothberg,
Here.
Council Liaison Hale,
Here.
Roger Thomas,
Here.
Mm-hmm.
Chris Costanza, and Bruce Koch.
Here.
Jen, would you be good enough to read the Statement of Compliance with Open Public Meetings Act?
Sure. The meeting is called to order. Annual notice of this meeting was provided to the Star Ledger on January 26, 2021, and to the Home News Tribune on January 26, 2021. In addition, notice of this meeting via Zoom was faxed to the Home News Tribune and emailed to the Star Ledger and the Highland Park Planet on June 22, 2021, and was posted on the borough's website at www.hpborough.com and on the bulletin board at Borough Hall, 221 South Fifth Avenue, and has remained continuously posted as required by law.
Thank you. We have, are there any members of the public who would like to address the board? Hearing none, we're moving on to approval of the minutes of the meeting, the reorganization meeting of January 13th.
Judy, we have, no, never mind. Sorry, I thought we had a hand raised, but we don't.
Oh, I do see a hand, but okay. Thank you, Jennifer. So is there a motion to adopt the minutes of January 13th, 2021?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Can we do a voice vote on this? I'll remember one year. All in favor. The minutes were have been reviewed, and Dana works with Jen, and then Rob had a few comments that have been incorporated. So all in favor of adopting the minutes, please raise your hand. Jen, the minutes are adopted unanimously. We have no correspondence and reports this evening, and so we're moving on to the only other item on the agenda, which is a land use update. Sorry. Okay, sorry about that. Zoom isn't perfect. So I have invited Councilman Matt Hale to join us. Excuse me, the phone call is from one of the board members. Just a moment, please. That was Bob Holzapfel. Jen, he never got a Zoom link. Are you able to help with that, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we'll just move along and hopefully he'll be able to join us right away. So you heard me say before that I think it's very important for the board members, for all of us, to be familiar with what's happening in terms of land use in the borough. And so Matt has very graciously agreed to join us and answer questions as well as giving us information. So Matt.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me. I certainly appreciate the opportunity. I'm really sort of hoping that this is a conversation. I'm not expecting to do a presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions and all the questions that the board members have on redevelopment. I thought maybe it would be helpful to sort of give the latest update of where things are in the redevelopment process, and through that maybe talk a little bit about the different parts of the redevelopment. If you have questions broader or more narrow or more specific, you know, I'll do my best to answer them as we go along. So where we are, it's the redevelopment plan has been through a large number of public meetings and hearings, and it's been to the planning board twice. It's been discussed at 6 to 7 council meetings. It's been had public meetings about it. For those of you who have had a chance to look at the redevelopment proposal or plan, it really breaks down that there are 4 separate areas, tracks A, B, C, and D. So tract A, visually, if you want to think about it, it is down the gas station that is down on Raritan Avenue on the other side of Ubrees is part of tract A. And then also there is additional sort of second phase of tract A on the same side of the street, but up by the cleaners near where the Gun and Boat is. The borough owns the gas station, and the borough also owns the Gun and Boat. Let me just make sure. I believe we have closed on that. I'm not 100% sure if we've closed on that, as well as some other parcels in that area. So that's tract A. Across the street, if you know where the Venezuelan restaurant is, behind the Venezuelan restaurant, and a little bit farther down, not directly behind it, is what's called tract B. That is currently has a development on it for 16 units that has been approved by the planning board, been through the entire process. They have not moved forward on that because they're interested in expanding the number of potential houses that they might have there, or apartments that they might have there, by doing a centralized parking structure. Tract D is up a little bit farther. It's the empty lot, the parking lot behind the Bridge restaurant and across from the Blue Horse restaurant. The empty parking lot is there. That's tract D. And then so those 3 tracks have the planning board has found all of those tracks, first of all, A and B, to be consistent with the master plan without any suggestions or modifications. Tract D is where we are proposing to have a centralized parking facility. And on that track, the planning board came back with some proposals about where the entrance and the exit was for that. We had originally planned to have a festival street on North 3rd. The latest plan is that is not going to happen, and there'll be simple in and out access of the parking garage. The parking garage is fronted on the Denison side by houses, and then on the North 3rd side, also fronted by some potentially public space down there. So the planning board has said that those are all consistent with the master plan. Tract D is consistent with the master plan as long as there's not a closing of North Third, which we agree with. The last one is track C, and that's the parking lot where the farmers market is. And so the requests of the planning board, or the hopes of the planning board, was that that the original conception of that as a single building would have some additional flexibility to allow for additional events that happen there in a public space, and also to dedicate a particular public space in the front of that, of track C. So we are working on the borough, and the professionals are working to sort of address many of these issues on track C. So that the process that'll go forward is on July 8th, the planning board will meet again to memorialize their decision from their last meeting, which is to, as you know, write up what their requests for, what they would like to see the council do. There is, on the 13th of July, there is a meeting of the redevelopment entity where we will take the suggestions of the planning board and introduce a redevelopment ordinance or resolution to adopt the redevelopment. We'll have discussion at that. And then the idea is that we will vote on that at the second reading, which will be at our first meeting in August. There is additional redevelopment meeting space in there if needed, but that's the current plan about where we are. The goal is that the council believes that we are very close to satisfying most of the concerns, if not all of the concerns that the planning board had, particularly with track C. We'll see if that happens on July 8th. But the idea is that we would be able to introduce something again on the 13th, and then vote a final one on August 6th. So I know that you're familiar with redevelopment plans. I know that you've had those in the past. So you know that that does not mean that shovels will be in the ground on August 7th. It'll certainly take quite a long time after this framework is set up. But the idea is that we will have created at least the picture frames with which the developers will be able to come and say, we would like to do this and we would like to do that. That one of the goals of the council from the beginning has always been that if this is in a redevelopment area and there is a past redevelopment plan, two things. Number one, the parcels that we own, which are the farmers market down on A, and then some others up on other parts of A, anything that's in a redevelopment agreement, you have to have a redevelopment agreement with the borough before moving forward. And so that gives the town and the residents sort of an extra layer of protection, I think, to try and negotiate as best we can out of for public goods and various things. Among those, paying for the parking garage. So we can talk about that in a little bit. We are hopeful that this timeline is going to work. We think that we've had a great deal of public comment, public input. We've changed the plan significantly from day one in response to much of that. And so I think it's probably a better plan for that. So that's sort of where we are. And I was hoping that might be a good segue for people to ask questions, either about specific parts, specific plans, anything that they've heard or anything that they have questions on. And like I said, I'll do my very best to answer them as best I can. I will point out it's me. I can't speak for the entire council. I'll do my best to be fair and honest of what I've heard from them and what I've heard from the planning board, and give you where we are. So.
Thank you, Matt. I would like the record to reflect that Rob Holzoffel has joined us, and I'm very happy to see you and glad that you got your link and got in. And Bruce Koch has unjoined. So Matt, thank you very much. And questions?
Yeah,
Bruce
so
Koch
are
is
there,
Clear. Sorry about that.
oh,
I just had to step away for a minute and I
Okay.
blocked myself as I did.
Thank you.
oh, Matt, are there conditional redevelopers for certain of these sections?
No, we don't have we've not had discussions with specific redevelopers that would get them to be a conditional redevelop.
Okay, and the Tantliff thing, I think it was A, that's over, that Tantliff was a conditional redeveloper years ago.
That may have been before my time.
Yeah, it was years ago, it must be over, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I do know that there was some, but I believe that's before my time, so.
And what happened with the site, we had an LSRP for the dry cleaner site that was,
So that we do not own the dry cleaners. The dry cleaners is still owned by the same family. They have done environmental studies on that, and I know this is probably not super technical, but it's not as bad as it could have been. Is sort of what I've been led to believe, is that there is probably some cleanup that will be needed at the dry cleaners site, but it is not I guess they don't believe it is as bad as it could be at other, we've seen at other dry cleaner sites. So
Have test wells been sunk there, Matt?
what was that?
Have they sunk test wells?
All I know is that they still own it, and they are discussing with the state specifics of it. So I believe that they have done that. I should double check that to make sure. My understanding is they've done all of the environmental work that they need to do on the cleaners to understand what the issue is. My understanding is that they were hoping that it was less than it is, but it was not as bad as it could be. That's really the best that I can do. I'll try and get some more information for you about specifics on that. I don't have those.
I have a question about why is the Sunoco on the corner of Second and Main Street or Raritan, one of the most prominent corners in town, with graffiti and abandoned for now years? Why is that not part of a redevelopment, part of Track B, which is, I think, almost next to it, right?
It's down a little bit. So this is, yes. The short answer is that we have no indication, in fact, we have a counter indication that the owner of that property has any interest in dealing with the town in any way, or selling or doing anything with that property. And so the reason it was not included is that one of the goals of this redevelopment stage where we are is to try and move ahead with places that either the borough owns or the borough has some sense that there might be able to be some movement forward, rather than put something in an area that there's clearly no clear path forward. I would also say that in all honesty, that we are the owner of the Sunoco station is also the owner and the developer of the Buck Woods area. And that process is still ongoing. And that process is working its way through a variety of different places. I'll say this for me, my sense is that putting the Sunoco into a redevelopment area would be counterproductive in negotiations over at Buck Woods. And someday, absolutely, we'd love to move on that. We would love to have that's certainly an eyesore in town that we'd like to work on. But again, the goal of doing a relatively small redevelopment idea is that we're only doing things where we think we have a chance to realistically move forward on.
I can understand and appreciate the effect of the Buckwoods issue with respect to the Sunoco station, but I think in my maybe misguided understanding of what redevelopment's all about, it is to exact and in fact get you exactly where you might want to be with an ugly property right downtown. And that is, I mean, I'm going to use the words, but no one wants to hear it. I mean, if it's a redevelopment area, you can take it, regardless of whether he wants to sell it. I know Highland Park is like runs away screaming when everyone raises that term, but this guy, I mean, golly, this would be one case where you might want to think about that option.
So, yes.
And I don't think that would necessarily slow down other redevelopment efforts in other tracks. I mean, I think you could proceed forward, but I mean, there's only limited resources. I get it. I'm just sort of, I'm getting frustrated with how long that's been sitting there ugly.
So believe me, I'm incredibly frustrated at that. You know, I will say that my understanding of the ability for any municipality to take something is significantly different today than it was just 3 years ago, and significantly more difficult and litigious. And on top of that, you know, I've made very, very clear, and this is not the case with Sunoco, but I think that we should not take working businesses from people because we want a nicer business there. And so that's why I've said very, very clearly, I'm not taking Ubris. I'm just not, because I can think of 1,000 things I'd rather do at Ubris, but it's his business and he doesn't want to, you know, so it is a very, very difficult issue. I think that one of the things that we're hoping, you know, by having a smaller steps forward is that perhaps it will shake loose other options and other abilities and other things to do. And I will tell you that the B&B behind Sunoco, you know, we've had someone say, what's going on with redevelopment? I really want to, you know, do something that it's a different owner. And that's the idea of that if we can get something moving on places that we have significant interest in and control over, that it will shake other things down the road that can move in a positive direction. So,
Matt, has there been any conversation with the owner of the burned out property in the 300 block of Raritan?
Yes, to say call us is essentially my understanding. It is I don't want to speak to what I don't know, but I believe that they're still thinking through insurance and thinking through a variety of different things. But I believe that we've contacted them as well as other properties in that area to say that we are interested in and hope that people would be interested in doing redevelopments there.
Other property owners have expressed interest, but
Yes, they have.
said it was all part of, you know, Plan B.
So I you know, again, Rob just mentioned about bandwidth, and there is a bandwidth question that we're again trying to focus on places that we can move forward, because if we try and put everything in and we try and make everything happen, I'm worried that nothing's going to happen. And so the goal is to try and do you know, steps that we can take, and solid, good steps that we can take, and then build off of those.
My sense is that perhaps you should be more agile and seize opportunity.
Okay.
I have another question about track C, which is where parking is for the Reformed Church. A lot of the time, I know it's not the Reformed Church's parking lot, but if a building goes there, how would people park? Is that connected to maybe a parking structure or sort of a street at track D? And secondly, where would the farmer's market go if a building goes there?
So there's a couple of things, and this is part of one of the changes that has been made over time as a result of public discussion. So originally we had conceptualized on track C a single building with a significant. We have the plan that we would push forward would have the possibility of having separate buildings. And what that does is allow for greater flexibility for public space, both in front and in between, and greater flexibility for parking for current events, for events that are held there. I will be straight that it will not be an empty parking lot, and there will be there will be less space. What our hope is that there will be plenty of space on that current spot for things like the movie night, or candle lighting, or the gingerbread houses, where you don't need the whole space, and you don't need for all of those other important public events. In terms of where the farmers market goes, so the primary discussions about the farmers market have been focused around moving the farmers market to South Third, where the town tables are right now, making the South Third town tables permanently closed and using that as a farmers market anchor. The thing that, we're talking with Main Street on a regular basis about this. We are, and it's a work in progress. I'm not going to say this is something that can happen tomorrow, but I think that the great thing about South Third is that you can have, I don't know if you behind the yellow brick schoolhouse is a municipal parking lot, which you could add additional farmers market on peak during the summer if you needed additional space. The other thing is that while we've decided not to close North Third on a permanent basis, we can close a portion of North Third. If you think about North Third from Raritan Avenue back to where the Provident Bank, how Provident Bank has that exit. So we could close from Raritan Avenue back to that exit, again, getting more space for a potential farmers market. So that seems to me to be a solution with creative people that could work, and a solution that could really be a great place for the farmers market to be. There's a lot of logistics. Where do the trucks go? How do the trucks get in? How do they get unloaded? All of those things, which would be worked through, and we would be committed to making sure that works through. There's discussions that we would have to have with neighbors on South Third. I've heard from some of those neighbors, why don't you just close it all the way up to Magnolia? That's not everybody, but there's certainly some who have made that argument. And so I think that the goal is that we need a space for the farmers market. We need a space to make sure the farmers market continues to thrive and is a fundamental part of Highland Park. I think that's going to be a place that can happen.
And
Matt,
the-
are you suggesting that the farmers market be divided by Raritan Avenue?
So when you look at the farmers market in terms of how many people it needs, how many vendors that they have, right? So there's a huge peak in the middle of summer where they have their most vendors. And so that lasts 4 weeks, maybe 5 weeks at best. And depending on the logistics of that, it may work best to have it divided between those, and then going around to the municipal lot in the back. At the end of summer and at the beginning, it's a much smaller market that could be a significant part of it could be done just on South Third. So that is one of the ways that I think we could make a large farmer, increase the size of the farmer market, make it work by dividing it that way.
Has any consideration been given to using like structured parking facilities, such as the first floor for the farmers market, such as on a rainy day, which would possibly allow it to be used even in summer wet weather?
So one of the things that is in the redevelopment plan is that the parking structure would be for the primary tenants of the parking structure are going to be the new people living on Raritan Avenue. That being said, it is very clear in the redevelopment plan as we're working on it that there are other possible uses that could be done on that first floor, or perhaps on a roof, right? So it is very clear that is something that we would like to explore. How that works itself out, I don't have an answer, but it is certainly something. The other thing that is important to note is that our conceptualization of the parking garage is that it would be fronted in a way that it would blend into the neighborhood, so that it's not that you are looking at a parking garage, you're looking at what looks like a facade of a building, and behind it is the parking garage, right? Which we've seen in lots of other places. And there is a possibility that there is some space that could be down at the bottom of that event space and things in that conceptualization. So.
Thanks.
Matt, is there a sense of what's going to happen with the tables on North 4th? Are they going to remain, or are they going to go?
So we have not made a determination of that. I personally, I'm speaking as Matt. I'm not speaking as a council. I'm not speaking as any. I volunteered to chain myself to them so that if DOT ever wants to take them away, they have to go through my body. So I'm a big fan of those things. I think they're fantastic. I know that's not a universal opinion, but I personally think that those are really adding a lot to the town. Even in winter, they were adding a lot, and so certainly this summer they're a thing. So again, we that is not part of the redevelopment, and so we haven't discussed that. But I would love to see them stay there for as long as they are useful. So
thank you for that.
Okay.
Matt, talking about North 4th, has any thought been given to prohibiting parking immediately across from the tables so that there's better access in the event of an emergency?
So we've been working very closely with the parking officer for the police department, who's monitoring the situation. And gives us updates about the trade-off, or I guess it's not I don't want to say it's a trade-off. So the people who live on North 4th are really, they love it. They love having it on North 4th. I have not heard a single person complaint. At the beginning, they were worried, but I've heard many people were very, very happy with it. But it does take parking potentially for guests for them away. They normally would be parking in front of Pino's where the town tables are. So I want to, and I do want to be able to balance that street parking with the safety aspects. I think one of the things that we're hoping to do on North 4th, and I'd certainly probably it'll happen on South 3rd as well, is we have to make them look prettier. And so there's a lot of we're right now going through the federal relief packages, hoping we can find money to make them look beautiful. But in that process of beautification on both North 4th and South 3rd, I think that there's some structural things that might be able to make the safety aspects even clearer, like the barriers coming down significantly more. The other thing is that we've gotten Google Maps to recognize you can't go that way anymore, and it took a little while, but we're seem to be discovering that when Google tells you can't do that, people listen. So so they may not listen to me, but they listen to Google. So but I do think I agree with you that safety concerns are important there. But I think there are other ways rather than removing that parking across the way.
I've seen a couple of incidents there where they simply just close the block for the time being, and it seems to work without issue.
Yeah, you mean for bigger events?
I saw an ambulance have to help somebody in medical distress at Pino's, and it's just like, okay, they were PSC&G for half an hour.
Right, there you go. Judy, you had another one?
Yeah, the other question was you began to touch on. It seems to be that before we even find the possibility of money to make those spaces on South 3rd and North 4th beautiful, we can definitely do something to make them less ugly. And the barriers, how much could barriers cost that could be more attractive, or another way of blocking the streets off? Pretty darn ugly now,
So one of-
to my aesthetic.
So
Perhaps the
can
planters.
I, for yours, how about one of the ideas that we have very recently just talked about is, those massive planters that are
Yeah,
on, those are pretty big barriers. And so we were exploring the idea of having those. Again, back to your point about safety, on North 4th, at least, because it is a split street. The police and the fire really do want to be able to move them relatively quickly. And so the way that they're structured right now is there's water inside those orange barriers. So that's one of the big barriers. So if you have to get out of there fast, you unload it and the water comes flying out and you can pick it up by yourself. You can't do that with a 400-pound planter. So that's a balance that but certainly those planters are something that would be very much better than what's there now, for sure.
I'm glad that you're looking into all of those aspects.
Yeah. Yeah. Others. So I will have to say that he may be gone, but my son is a Boy Scout and he has to observe a public meeting, one where there's conflict involved. And so, if don't be afraid of any of those conflict questions, because Zach's an attendee right now and he has to write down when that happens. So, if there's any, please don't hesitate. I'd much rather, get it out and have a talk about it. And if we agree to disagree, we do, but, I'd much rather do that. So.
Matt, has the development community heard about what's going on in Highland Park through the grapevine? And have you had any expressions of interest, even from the folks the developers who are working in town?
Yes.
Good.
I mean, we have had requests for the documents. We've had requests for timelines. We've had requests for, what's going on in Highland Park. So I want to be very, very careful. We do not have a developer sitting in the back pocket who wants to, do all of this. And that's very, we do not. What we would like is 10 developers who are going to argue over who's going to give us the best deal. That would be the greatest thing in the world. But so there are a number of them who've expressed interest, who are following this process closely, and ideally, when the time comes, they'll be ready.
I just want to make an observation. Guess when you do get someone interested, be easy on people. We're not in a position where we've got people knocking down our door, and we don't want to be. I mean, I don't know how the word gets out, but I know, for example, like, look, I wasn't super psyched about the 7-Eleven proposal where the Sunoco was going, but we as a town were hard on them and they ran away. I understand that we gave, and people have different opinions about what Rite Aid did with their windows and whatnot. But look, they're a thriving business in this town, and if we're gonna fight over windows and awnings, we're gonna make it harder for people, not easier for people. So to the extent we can, if someone says, hey, I really need this particular aspect of that, and it doesn't exactly match, but it's not a big deal, let's look the other way, or at least be flexible enough to sort of say, okay, fine, you're coming here, you're spending money here, we want to welcome you. We don't want to say your awning is red, not blue, so you can't be here. I think that's a mentality the town council needs to think about. It's like, we're not in a position yet to dictate. So we should work flexible and work with whoever shows up.
I want to echo Rob's feelings. I mean, I wasn't crazy about the 7-Eleven, but these many years later, it would be better than where we're at now.
I agree. I agree with that. Curb cut. And one other thing that's not completely unrelated to this, but it's all about redevelopment, making the place better. and it's two quick little comments. If the town council can put a little bit of pressure on New Brunswick, when you go from the walking bridge into New Brunswick, their sign is fallen down, their little planter boxes are full of weeds, it's not maintained at all. Highland Park does a great job maintaining the sidewalk on the downriver side of the bridge. My understanding is that New Brunswick is supposed to maintain the sidewalk on the upriver side or the upstream side of it, and
Yeah.
they do a crappy job. So
The yield sign is gone coming off of Route 18.
yeah, so to the extent that you guys as a council could say to New Brunswick, come on, guys, spend a little effort and make your entryway look pretty, it would be great for all of us. And
Okay.
one whacked out thought, but way out there, the noise from Route 18 is just growing all the time. To the extent that maybe we can get federal funds or state funds to have some sort of a sound wall that at least bounces the sound up as it goes straight across the river into Highland Park, that would be awesome. I know I'm dreaming, but I just wanted to throw it on the radar screen.
Well, is Bruce still? That's an engineering question. We should ask Bruce. But I can tell you that that the mayor has a pretty good relationship with the New Brunswick mayor. And more so in that one of the things that we've seen recently is the new president of Rutgers actually knows where Highland Park is and would like to be our friend. And a lot of, I mean, not just that he's got a lot on his plate, but he has met with the mayor. And on top of that, we have regular meetings now with the Rutgers planners to
Great.
try and brainstorm ideas about how to do a lot better integration between Rutgers and Highland Park. And we've shared data back and forth about, the number of Rutgers people that live in Highland Park. We've shared data about the trips that go back and forth. I think there could be some real opportunities in terms of partnering Highland Park with Rutgers in a much more productive way.
That's great to hear. I can help with that because I have an angle there, as you might know.
I think you might. So we would definitely go for that. So yeah. Go ahead, Judy.
I'm curious, Matt, what does the borough envision on tracks A and D? Some combination of retail and residential, only residential, like when the borough dreams of what might happen there, what does that dream look like?
I think the primary driver of our vision is that we want to get more people on Raritan Avenue to go and eat and shop, who live on Raritan Avenue. So the focus on Raritan Avenue would be getting people to live there, to be able to shop, go to the dry cleaners, and all of the amenities that go on in Highland Park to make those businesses thrive. There is possibility for some additional retail, but not much, because if you got vacant shops already, we ought to fill those first before we sort of, we don't want to create brand new, retail stuff and then have everything else be empty. So I will say that the primary driver of these particular developments is to get feet on the street, right? And so we can do a lot of different calculations. You can do a lot of different ways in terms of how much money they would be spending on average and all of that. But we could easily, with all of these developments full and have an additional 350 people on Raritan Avenue, the economic engine of that could be an additional $15,000 to $20,000 per store. That's the difference between opening and closing for many people. And so that really is the primary driver is feet on the street on Raritan Avenue. So the other possibilities that we've talked about are doing things like co-work spaces, or that there would be that the apartments would have a place where people could not work at home but come downstairs and work, and you could have some things like that. We specifically said that axe throwing can happen on Raritan Avenue, just because that seems like something really cool. So it's like there's a laundry list of things, but I will say number one is feet on the street and people in the apartments on Raritan.
That sounds good. And I had another question, which is, as you know, structured parking is exceedingly expensive.
Mhm.
And what's the borough's vision for how developers are going to pay for that?
So it really is in many respects a math problem. And these are not numbers that we can take to the bank, but here's a way that I've envisioned it, right? If you have on-site parking, you can have 50 houses and 50 parking spaces, right? If you have off-site parking, you can have 100 houses and 75 parking spots. Just because there will be people who have less and don't want to buy into a parking lot, right? So that math is good for a developer, because a developer would like to be able to rent or sell more apartment units and not have to pay for as much or worry for as much about parking. The parking garage, as we envision it, is the primary tenants of that parking garage will be the new people living on Raritan Avenue. And therefore, the primary people paying for that ought to be the development and the developers of those places. So again, it's a math problem. It's a negotiation problem that we would enter into before redevelopment. How much do they contribute to the construction of this? And that's, that's part of the negotiation that we go back and forth with. I will say that one of the visions or holy grails, or one of the things that I would love to do is I would love to have a shuttle going to the train station every 15 minutes, from 6 a.m. to 11 at night or 12 at night. If we had a centralized parking spot, that's where you could pick it up. If you had developers who are selling to people, here's a place you can live without a car, that would be enticing for them to help pay for that. So, that's in the back of our minds, is that there would be some sort of jitney service that would get people to the train stations from a centralized parking lot. Again, the goal is that, since the people using it are going to be the people, buying and renting on Raritan Avenue, they're the ones that would pay for it, or pay as much as they can for it.
Thank you.
Would you also consider individual or personal scale transport, like the scooters, which are becoming more ubiquitous, instead of being a dedicated shuttle service?
So let me talk to the scooters first, because Stephanie, Kim, and I are going to have a scooter race on Zoom as soon as we get scooters in town. We're so excited to have scooters in town. There is a company that is working with Rutgers. It's called VIO, and it's a scooter sharing service. You have an app, and you go and you use your app, and you can get the scooter and drive it wherever you want, and then drop it off at another. We would love to have a scooter port in Highland Park, so that you can pick that up and ride those over. So we actually introduced that at the last council meeting, but decided that we weren't 100% sure when we introduced it what the age was of legality for the state, and we wanted to make sure we matched that. There were some conflicting reports about whether it was 16 or 17, so we pulled it to get that right. But we're going to introduce it again, and it'll say where scooters can go, what the rules are for scooters, and then the next stage of that is to go and work with this company to get a scooter port. In terms of the other shuttle service, again, it's a money problem. It's a question of how do we pay for that, and who do we get that money from? I really think that is a big part of how we entice people to come to Highland Park and get to the train. And so I think we'd ideally like to make that as easy as possible. I would like to have developers pay for that. If they can't, I'd like to figure out how developers in the town pay for that. So, because I think that's a really important thing for us to do.
I've been holding my tongue a bit since.
Rob,
just 1 minute.
I think Wolfram had his hand up. Could I just grab him?
Wolfram's been waiting, and then it will definitely be your turn.
Sure.
Quick question. When you think about these amazing ideas of having like scooters and all these different things, but this will add to the challenging crossing of the Raritan when we walk across, bicycle across, and with this communication, like following up Rob Rosner about how do we, talking with New Brunswick, is there any thought to improve that really, really dangerous crossing situation for people who commute to work across the river with bicycles?
Oh, you mean on the side of the bridge?
On the side of the bridge, exactly.
Yeah.
You're talking about really
Yeah.
big investment, anybody expansion of the bridge or something that the conflict between bicyclists, like almost every morning I do that, I'm almost hurting people. So I want to be confident. Like,
so I will tell you about two conversations that we've had on that. I don't, I'll have to get back to you about specifically where we are in that. One of the conversations, like I mentioned earlier, is with the federal money. Is this something that federal money that we're going to get? Is that something that we could be used to do for? So we're trying to dig through. Right now, I guarantee you we can use federal money to fix stormwater stuff, and we can use federal money to, do stormwater infrastructure. But I don't. There's stuff in there about resiliency. There's stuff in there, and it's just this, stuff I don't understand. So we have weed through that, but we've certainly had that conversation. The other conversation that we've had is our state senator is Pat Deignan, who is now the chair of the transportation committee. And so we're working with him to put a priority of things that we need for state transportation from state transportation. And we have talked to him about trying to make improvements on the bicycle access across the bridge. And that, I know we've had those conversations. I don't know where they've led, but those are certainly ones that we ought to continue. All right. Bob.
Boy, I think I had a dream about a gondola or a monorail or something connecting Highland Park and New Brunswick.
There you go. There you go.
I just the other side of what Rob Rosner was saying was, don't scare people away, be nice to them. I say don't be too nice to them, because the reality is, if this could be done through private enterprise, right? I mean, we're already saying that it's authorized under the master plan. You could, I don't know how high you're planning on going. I don't know if you need to change your ordinance at all, but the reason you go redevelopment route traditionally is either because you want to exercise condemnation or you want to give away tax exemptions in order to incentivize developers to do the job. So Highland Park strikes me as like, yes, certainly there are places that could look nicer, not just the barriers on 3rd and 4th. But I think we're a pretty attractive alternative to a lot of places for a lot of reasons. And I would just say, let's not give away the store. Like if we're going to give away property tax revenue for 30 years or something, that's a big deal. So that would be my one piece of advice to go to the council.
Okay, I appreciate that. I will say, you're right that this allows for the ability to do pilot agreements and to be able to do those types of things. But I can say very clearly that is not the driving mechanism that we think. We think that Highland Park is attractive enough that if you have developers who can build sizable enough units for them to get returned, that we may not need those, that we may not have to go to the pilot route. Again, we are in the goal is to make us as attractive as we possibly can so that we have people bidding on various projects and that we take the best bid. And that bid is a combination of tax dollars, public goods, public benefits, design, track record. I mean, there's a whole huge list of things that you want to, put into that. And I think this process is also because in order for once this is finished, you have to have a redevelopment agreement to build, to do anything. And that's not the case now. Right now, if the owner of the bridge parking lot wanted to build a 3-story prison, to build, to put cars in that looks like a prison, probably could do it. So we're hoping that this gives us it's questionable, but he might, but the idea is that we would be able to have a little bit more control through this process. So.
Zoned for a prison, I didn't know that.
No, I'm sorry. It looks like a prison, but it's a parking garage that looks like a prison. That's where I mixed my metaphors there, so I apologize.
You guys are aware, I'm sure you got people tracking down all sources of financing for things like the jitney you were talking about, of the shuttle service, but keep Middlesex moving. Keep Middlesex moving is one of these entities out there that.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Matt, would you speak for just a few minutes about the other projects that are going on in town? River Road is well underway. Maybe talk a little bit about that. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I'm not thinking of.
Well, so River Road is well underway. That's pretty much, it's close. They're getting there. I will tell you that the neighborhood, I have not heard from the neighbors about the way that they've handled that, and it seems that they've worked very well together in the neighborhood. That doesn't mean that the neighbors are jumping and doing backflips for this, but I do believe that they have that the developer has really gone out of his way to sort of help the neighborhood with when he starts and all of those types of things. So I think that part has gone quite well. In terms of other developments that are out there, up on Cleveland Avenue, where the ambulance place used to be, there is a proposal in front of the planning board right now that isn't great. And what I mean by that is that it is exactly what our current code says it can be, which is single family homes with garage mouths at the front.
Outhouses?
What was that? Townhouse.
Looking of snout houses?
Yes. So we think that there is a possibility that the developer would make some changes that would be more in line with the master plan. But again, that's part of the process. Right now, it seems that the original proposal is exactly what there's not a lot of wiggle room. And so, and that's a bit unfortunate. We were sort of hoping that that we'd have enough bandwidth to have the master plan code changes put in and put through, and it just hasn't happened. So we're in the process of sort of negotiating with that developer to make some improvements over there. But again, he's just building as is. The other one that I thought this board might want to hear a little bit about is cannabis.
Matt, before we move on, can you tell me, has there been any progress on putting those changes through, for amending the garage ordinance?
Yeah, I thought we had an anti-garage in the front.
Yeah, so progress is relative. We to be honest, that what we had hoped for originally was to be able to provide all of the changes that came out of the most recent master plan land use in a comprehensive form, and perhaps what we should have done is gone a little bit smaller than that. And so we just haven't got to it. It's just that straight up that it's not there yet. So
but I'm confused because I thought our existing code does not allow garage like snout houses. Like we had that one on Grant that they had to come back because they had a garage in the front, and then they realized, oh, we can't do that. So I thought it was already prohibited.
So you know what? Maybe I got the term wrong in terms of snout houses. My understanding is that what they proposed is exactly what they can do, but it's front-facing garages. So it's not a pop-out snout house, but maybe it's a front-facing garage.
Right.
So those changes are changes that we just have to sit down and do, and we haven't done it. And that's just, that's where we are. And I apologize that we haven't done it, but that's where we are. So
It's been 3 years on that.
I don't know, because I heard about it about 6 months ago. So, you know, but anyway, they're not there. They just aren't. So I know that we're hoping to work on them. They're just not there. So, so the other thing that is coming is eventually is cannabis is legal. And so what that means for Highland Park and what that means for zoning, you know, is a part of a discussion. And I can go as deep as you want into where the town is headed for that way, or I could focus on what we're thinking in terms of numbers and where and that type of thing. I'm not sure how deep you want me to go, but I'd be happy to talk about cannabis if that's of interest to you.
I'd be happy to hear everything.
I'm interested in it, sure, please go ahead. And
Okay.
if anybody needs to leave, that's fine, feel free to,
Sure.
you know, to drop off.
Okay, so as you all know, that the state of New Jersey overwhelmingly passed legalization of recreational cannabis last or November, a year ago, I guess, wasn't it? November of 2020. Yeah, must have been. And I will let you know that Highland Park voted. There is only one town in all of Middlesex County that had a higher yes vote than Highland Park. Want to take a guess on what that was?
New Brunswick?
Oh yeah. New Brunswick was way up there. New Brunswick was like 77%. So, we were about 69%. So it's very, very popular. That doesn't mean that, you know, but it's so it's coming. So the state has identified 6 separate classes for cannabis licenses. And the way to think about that is there's a class for growing it. There's a class for harvesting it and putting it into warehouses. There's a class for distribution. There's a class for retail. There's a class for delivery, and a wholesale class. I skipped one. So if you think about it from the ground to your house, it breaks it up along that supply chain, right? And so of those 6 classes, all of the municipalities in New Jersey were given the opportunity to say whether they wanted to opt in or opt out of any of those 6 classes, but you have to do it by August 20th, 2021. So what you're seeing is a wide variety of responses. Metuchen just opted out.
I'm sorry, could you clarify, if you don't do anything, is the default opt out?
No, if you want to opt out, you have to affirmatively say we're done. If you don't opt in or you don't opt out, the existing zoning is what covers you.
Oh.
And how that fits with cannabis, who knows? So what you have the option for August 20th, if you want to opt out of any of the categories, meaning we don't want this in our town, you can do that by August 20th.
Matt, I've been dealing with this in the town that I work. You can opt in at any time, but if you do not opt out, then you are stuck for 5 years. So
Right.
that's why so many towns are opting out.
So if you don't, so if you don't opt out, or if you don't decide what you're doing by August 20th, then you're under then it's essentially free for all for those 5 years, I think is the way that it works, right? So of those 6 categories, most of them have nothing to do and will never have anything to do with Highland Park. We don't have enough land to grow it. We don't have enough warehouse space to store it. We don't have enough truck space to be a wholesale deliverer. We may have distribution. So if you think about, you know, there's a possibility down the road that you may have, a distribution site where we could be the Middlesex distributor of something, right? So that's a maybe, right? So those 4 classes are pretty much not, they're not coming to Highland Park. There's no way that they're coming to Highland Park. We just don't have the space. And we don't really know exactly how they're going to be regulated. So those are 4 that we're going to opt out of. We're going to just say those aren't for us. So that leaves retail and that leaves delivery. So let me start with delivery because it's the easier one. When I say delivery, it is illegal under this to stop delivery into your town. So you can't say there'll be no Uber Cannabis coming to Highland Park, even if Uber Cannabis as a business is based in Piscataway. They have the right to deliver anywhere that they want to. So the delivery category is about a business that does delivery. So it's about a business that picks up a certain amount of product someplace, brings it to a place, and then drives it all. They have the cars around. So we're saying, yes, we could do a delivery business. We could have a delivery business in Highland Park of some sort. And then of course, retail, right? Retail is, the selling of it. And that can be in a variety of different forms. And so we would like to say yes to both of those. I think the reasons and the rationale why we're leaning towards doing that is really that New Brunswick has said yes, and that the economic possibilities of having retail outlets in Highland Park are pretty good. And some of those storefronts could be retail outlets. We have a tentative idea that we would have 2 retail outlets in downtown, 2 retail outlets on Woodbridge, and 2 retail outlets on Raritan, on Upper Raritan. So that a total of 6, which roughly is about the number of alcohol licenses I think that we have.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that there's going to be 6. It's just we're sort of saying that we don't want to have, every single business from 2nd Avenue to 6th. We don't want all of those to be retail marijuana businesses. So we thought
Matt,
that.
do you think the state's going to come up with some rules, like saying that we're going to use a formula similar to liquor licenses?
It just depends on how much they partake of the supply before they make those decisions. I literally, we have no idea. I mean, literally, there is a Cannabis Regulatory Commission, and they are supposed to be the ones who start and decide all of those things. And ultimately, if the state decides this is what we were going to do, that's what we're going to do, right? We're going to follow whatever the state law does. But one of the goals of trying to say and put ourselves in a place where we've already thought about the number, we've already thought about whether it's going to be an annual license or a multi-year license. What have we thought about? What are going to be the different space requirements? When we thought about those, is that I think that that's a way of signaling to the industry that Highland Park is ready for this, and it's going to be signaling that there's not going to be that Metuchen is not ready for it, for example. And I think that's to our advantage, and sort of taking a first mover advantage on that. And so, but again, if the state changes and decides something different, then we'll adjust and we'll go to the state. But we think by setting our goals ahead of time, we're going to be more proactive than sort of waiting for the state, because that could take a long time, and we just don't, we don't know where they're going to come out. So. The one area that we are still talking about or thinking about is on-site consumption places, and it's a tough issue. It just is. There's a number of different things that we're trying to weigh. So one of the big concerns, I think, is secondhand smoke. If you have a facility where we would try and make sure that it's got a super HVAC system, or that it's somehow like a cigar lounge model or something like that. But the last thing in the world that we want to do is have a facility where you open the door and it smells like a Dead show immediately. Not that I'm a big fan of the Dead, so just to put that out there. So structuring how that is something that we're still going back and forth and trying to figure out. It's a little different with edibles, you know, of having a consumptional place where you do edibles, because you don't have the secondhand smoke capacity or potential dangers of secondhand smoke. So the interesting thing is that the state has offered absolutely no guidelines whatsoever on any of the lounges. That we have no idea what they're going to do, and they don't even mention it as a class in the legislation, right? Or they've divided it into 6 classes, but is a retail store with consumption different than a retail store without consumption? We don't know. So we don't, you know, so we would try and define some of those things a little bit better. So, you know, all of we're trying to overlay as much as we can onto existing alcohol laws. You know, you can't have public consumption of alcohol, so you shouldn't have public consumption of marijuana. And so that's sort of a model that we're public. I mean, walking down the street, you know, is sort of something that we would probably say no to. So, so what we're hoping is that we're going to have, you know, this sort of resolution and put together. It does have to go to the planning board, and the planning board has to weigh in on it. So we're in a really tight deadline, and we're hoping that that's going to be able to happen by August 20th. So we're you know, we've got the professionals working on the chapter and verse of it. So.
Is it going to be zoned so that it can't be within a certain distance from a school?
So unlike alcohol, there is currently 0 rules about where it can be zoned. So you can make it in the school cafeteria if you wanted to. So there is no there is no prohibition of it in a distance from a school or a house of worship. Which is probably a good thing, because when you look at the map of downtown Highland Park, there's a 6-foot stretch between 5th and 6th, or no, between 4th and 5th that you can actually, that you're not that far away. So, so there are not restrictions for distance from a school. But that being said, you know, we would, you know, we're not going to put it in the cafeteria. We're not, you know, that would not.
No more drug-free school zones?
So I would also say that we've had conversations with the school board, and they've been really thinking about this, I think, pretty seriously, about what are the types of programs that they're going to put into place from, you know, from the elementary school on up to educate students about marijuana, about cannabis. So I think they're going to be ready with an education process for students that I think is an important one. So that's where cannabis is. So you know, we're going to have a meeting tomorrow night, you know, to talk about it. I'm anticipating that there will be people who are not in favor of cannabis who attend this meeting, and people who are in favor of it. So it's really just a chance for the public to weigh in, but that's the direction that we're headed. So.
Thank you.
Matt, thank you so much. Any
Yeah,
other
thank you.
questions? All right. Well, I very, very much appreciate your meeting with us and giving us such a thorough update on what's happening in town. And you guys are really very busy, and I wish you the best with getting everything done and in place and in meeting your deadlines. And we have interesting things to be looking forward to.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And, you know, if you ever have questions, if you ever have things that you've heard or anything like that, don't hesitate in a second to drop me an email or something like that in between meetings. I'm happy to, you know, I'll do my best to you know, tell you what I know, and that's about all I can do. So, you know, don't hesitate for a second anytime.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night,
Have a
everyone.
Goodbye.
Night.
good summer.
Bye-bye.
Stay healthy. Good night.
Good night.
Jennifer, thank you so much.
Yes,
You're
thank you,
welcome.
Jennifer.
Good night, everyone.
Good
Goodbye.
night.
Thanks, Jennifer. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.